The crystal chandeliers in the Buckhead ballroom caught the light like cold diamonds. I sat at table number 14 near the kitchen doors, watching the waitstaff carry silver trays of roasted quail and truffles. I wore my old navy blue suit, the one I bought back in 2005 with the frayed cuffs and the slight fade on the lapels. The room buzzed with the sound of money, old money, new money, and pretend money. Mostly pretend money. My daughter Simone stood at the head table draped in a backless emerald gown that probably cost more than a working man makes in a year. She was 32 years old, holding a glass of vintage champagne, laughing with a group of real estate developers and socialites. I kept my hands folded on the white tablecloth and just observed. We were here for her engagement party. She was marrying Trey, a man who called himself an entrepreneur, but had the shifty eyes of a corner hustler wearing a tailored tuxedo. Trey stood next to her, flashing a platinum watch, grinning like he had already won the lottery. I took a slow sip of my ice water, feeling the chill slide down my throat. I did not belong here, and Simone made sure I knew it. She had placed me at the furthest table away from her wealthy friends, away from the cameras, away from the center of attention. A sharply dressed waiter approached my table offering a tray of delicate appetizers. "No thank you," I said quietly. The waiter nodded and moved on, probably wondering why a man in a worn-out suit was sitting alone at a $50,000 party. I knew why. Simone invited me for a specific reason. She needed a prop. She needed to show her new high society circle just how far she had risen by showing them exactly where she came from. The music faded and the gentle clinking of silverware stopped as Simone tapped her crystal glass with a spoon. The room fell completely silent. I watched her step up to the microphone, her emerald dress shimmering under the lights. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Simone said, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom. "Trey and I are so blessed to be surrounded by such success and excellence." She smiled at her fiancé, and the crowd clapped softly. Then her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the mayors, the bank managers, and the local celebrities until they landed squarely on me. "And I want to give a special welcome to my father, Nathaniel," she announced. Heads turned eyes, searching the back of the room until they found me sitting quietly in the shadows. I did not wave, and I did not smile. I just looked at her. "My father has always lived a simple life." Simone continued, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness people use when they want to insult you politely. "He worked hard in his little blue-collar job, was making sure we had the absolute bare minimum to survive." The crowd chuckled lightly, an uncomfortable sound that hung in the air. I kept my face perfectly neutral. Trey walked over to her, handing her a small, neatly wrapped box. Simone held it up for everyone to see. "Dad, I know you cannot afford much, and I know coming to an event like this must be very overwhelming for you," she said, walking slowly down the center aisle toward my table. The cameras flashed, capturing every moment of her grand performance. She stopped right in front of me, looking down at my faded suit with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I brought you a little something," Simone said, placing the small box on the table right next to my water glass. "Because I know you are still driving that old beat-up sedan, and I do not want it breaking down on your way back to your little neighborhood." The room was dead silent now. I looked at the box, then looked up into the eyes of my daughter. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to get angry or embarrass myself or break down and cry so she could play the victim and look like the generous, successful daughter. I slowly reached out and opened the box. Inside, resting on a cheap piece of foam, was a $20 gas station gift card and a plastic keychain. I stared at the plastic keychain, registering the absolute disrespect, the public humiliation, the intentional cruelty. She had spent tens of thousands of dollars on ice sculptures and caviar, but tossed me a $20 card like I was a beggar on the street. "Well, go on, Dad, say thank you," Simone pushed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Tell everyone how much this means to you." I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and slowly let it out. 30 years of building an empire, 30 years of moving in silence, 30 years of protecting my blood, and this was the result. A daughter who looked at me and saw nothing but a stepping stone, a joke, a poor old man to be mocked in front of strangers. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to explain that the very ground she was standing on was paid for by the sweat of my brow. Information is a weapon, and I do not draw my weapon until I'm ready to fire. I closed the little box and pushed it gently back across the table toward her. I stood up from my chair, adjusting the lapels of my old navy blue suit. The fabric felt rough, but it was honest. I looked Simone dead in the eyes, reading the arrogance and the entitlement radiating off her. "You have a beautiful party, Simone," I said calmly, my voice steady and deep. "I wish you and Trey all the luck in the world." I turned my back to her, ignoring the confused whispers rippling through the ballroom. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps silent on the thick plush carpet. I did not look left, and I did not look right. I kept my head high, my shoulders squared, and my expression unreadable. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, furious that I had not given her the show she wanted. She wanted a broken man, but a king does not break when a child throws a tantrum. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool Atlanta night, leaving the noise and the disrespect far behind me. The cool Atlanta air hit my face as I walked out of the hotel lobby. I stood under the massive stone awning and took a deep breath. Valets in crisp red vests were running back and forth, fetching sports cars and luxury SUVs for the early departures. A young valet stepped up to me, looking at my faded suit, and pointed toward the street corner. "The bus stop is 2 blocks down, sir," he said, his voice polite but dismissive. I did not look at him, and I did not answer. I just stood there waiting. Less than a minute later, a jet-black Maybach, long and sleek as a midnight shadow, glided silently up to the curb. The valet stepped back, his eyes widening as he realized the car was not stopping for any of the men in expensive tuxedos. It was stopping for me. The driver, a broad-shouldered man named David, stepped out quickly and opened the rear door. "Good evening, Mr. Nathaniel," David said, dipping his head respectfully. "Everything go as expected?" he asked. "Exactly as expected," I replied, sliding into the soft cream-colored leather of the back seat. The door clicked shut, sealing me inside a soundproof vault of absolute luxury. I took off the old navy blue suit jacket, the costume I had worn for the evening, and tossed it onto the empty seat beside me. I loosened my tie and poured myself a small glass of sparkling water from the chilled console. I took a sip, letting the cold water wash away the taste of my daughter and her absolute betrayal. For 5 years, I had let Simone believe a lie. When her mother passed away, Simone changed. She became obsessed with status, with designer labels, with people who measured a man by the watch on his wrist. So I hid the empire. I put the real estate, the investment firms, and the holding companies behind blind trusts. I gave her an allowance, a very generous one, but I told her it was the last of my life savings. I wanted to see who she would become when she thought the money was finite. Tonight, she showed me exactly who she was. She was a woman who would humiliate her own flesh and blood for a round of applause from strangers. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slim, encrypted smartphone. I dialed a private number, a direct line to my lead wealth manager, Vance. He answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Nathaniel Vance," said his voice sharp and professional despite the late hour. "I assume the party is over," he asked. "The party is over," I said, staring out the tinted window as the Maybach cruised down Peachtree Street. "It is time to execute the protocol, Vance. Pull the plug on all of it." There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of a man pulling up digital files. "All of it," Vance asked, just to be absolutely certain. "The platinum credit lines, the condo deed, The vehicle leases he listed. Every single dime, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Freeze the black cards immediately. Contact the property management group in Buckhead. I want an eviction notice placed on her penthouse door by tomorrow afternoon. Call the repo company and have them pick up the luxury SUV. She thinks she owns that life, Vance, but the holding company owns every piece of it. It is time she learns the difference. Understood, Vance replied, his fingers typing rapidly across a keyboard. The credit cards will be declined by morning. The cars will be secured. What about the trust fund, he asked. Lock it down, I ordered. She gets nothing. Not until she understands the value of $1 and the price of disrespect. What about the boy, Trey, I asked. Vance let out a dry chuckle. I ran the background check you requested, Nathaniel. The boy is a fraud. He leases his clothes, and he is deep in debt. He has been using Simone to fund his lifestyle, assuming she had endless family money. Well, I said, leaning back into the leather seat. He's about to find out she is as broke as he is. Send the files to Leon. I want my investigator tracking their every move starting tomorrow. When the walls close and desperate people do desperate things, and I want to know exactly what they plan to do next. Consider it done, Nathaniel Vance said, and the line went dead. I put the phone back in my pocket and looked out at the glittering skyline of downtown Atlanta. 30 years ago, I came to this city with nothing but a strong back and a sharp mind. I built shopping centers. I bought commercial real estate. I fought tooth and nail to create a legacy that would last for generations. I gave Simone a life of privilege, hoping she would use it to build something greater. Instead, she used it to buy a front row seat to her own destruction. The Maybach merged onto the highway, heading toward my private estate, a sprawling gated property hidden deep in the northern suburbs. Simone thought I lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She thought I was a broken-down retired laborer holding on to a $20 gas card. Tomorrow morning the sun would rise and her entire world would collapse. The first domino had just been pushed, and I was going to sit back and watch them all fall. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Buckhead penthouse. Simone woke up wrapped in silk sheets, feeling like the queen of Atlanta. The engagement party was a massive success, and she had finally put her father in his place, right in front of everyone who mattered. She rolled out of bed, slipped into a designer day dress, and grabbed her leather handbag. Today was a day for celebration, a day to spend money and remind herself of exactly who she was. She drove her luxury SUV down Peachtree Road, heading straight for Phipps Plaza. The valet took her keys with a polite nod, and she walked through the heavy glass doors into the marble corridors of the shopping center. She bypassed the regular stores and walked right into the most exclusive boutique, the kind of place where the air smells like rich leather and expensive perfume. A sales associate, a young woman in a sharp black suit, rushed over to greet her. "Good morning, Miss Simone," the associate said, smiling brightly. "We just received the new spring collection right from Paris." Simone did not even look at her, just waved her hand dismissively and walked toward the display cases. She pointed at a pristine white leather handbag sitting behind the glass. It had a price tag of $12,000. "I will take that one," Simone said, tapping the glass with her manicured fingernail. "And wrap it nicely. It is a gift to myself for a flawless evening." "Of course, Miss Simone," the associate replied, unlocking the case and carefully placing the bag on the counter. She rang up the total, adding the exorbitant luxury tax, and turned the screen toward Simone. "That will be $12,960. Simone reached into her wallet and pulled out a heavy metal platinum card. It was her favorite card, the one with no predefined spending limit. She slid it across the glass counter with a smug, satisfied smile. The associate inserted the card into the machine. The little digital screen blinked, reading processing, and then beeped a sharp negative tone. The associate frowned and pulled the card out. "I am so sorry, Miss Simone." the associate said, her voice dropping to a polite whisper. The machine says the card is declined. Simone rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh. Try it again, she demanded, tapping her foot on the marble floor. Your machine is probably broken or the chip is dirty. Do you know how much money I spend in the store? She asked, raising her voice just enough for the other wealthy shoppers to hear. The associate wiped the metal card on her sleeve and inserted it a second time. The machine processed and beeped again. Declined. I'm very sorry, the associate said, her smile fading into a look of uncomfortable pity. It is coming back as a hard decline from the issuing bank. Simone felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. People were looking now. A woman in a tailored suit standing near the jewelry counter glanced over with a raised eyebrow. Simone snatched the platinum card out of the machine and dug back into her wallet. Fine, she snapped, pulling out a sleek black corporate card. Use this one and hurry up. I have a lunch reservation at 1 o'clock. The associate took the black card and ran it through the system. Beep. Declined. The associate stepped back from the counter, holding the card by the edges. Miss Simone, I'm afraid this one is blocked as well, she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. It says the account has been suspended pending closure. Simone slammed her hand flat on the glass display case, making the associate jump. Suspended, she yelled, her voice echoing through the quiet boutique. That is impossible. My accounts hold millions of dollars. Do you have any idea who I am? She demanded. I'm just reading what the terminal says, the associate replied, looking around for the store manager. Perhaps you should call your wealth management team to clear up the fraud alert. Simone snatched her black card off the counter, her hands shaking with absolute fury. She shoved both cards back into her designer wallet. You just lost a $12,000 commission because your store has cheap broken equipment, she sneered. I will be calling corporate about this humiliation. She spun around on her high heels and stormed out of the boutique, her face burning hot with shame. The other shoppers watched her leave, whispering behind their hands. Simone walked fast, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floors, trying to escape the pitying stares. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed the private concierge number on the back of her platinum card. The line rang once, twice, and then a cold, automated voice answered. We are sorry, but the account you are trying to reach has been permanently closed by the primary account holder. If you believe this is an error, please contact your financial institution. Simone stopped walking right in the middle of the crowded mall. The phone slipped slightly in her grip. Closed, she whispered to herself. The primary account holder. She had never really paid attention to the paperwork. She just signed where she was told and spent the money as it flowed in. Her chest tightened and a cold spike of panic hit her stomach. She dialed Trey, needing him to fix this, needing his money to cover her until the bank sorted out this ridiculous error. The phone rang and rang, going straight to his voicemail. She turned around, abandoning her shopping trip, and practically ran toward the valet stand. She needed to get back to her penthouse. She needed to sit down, open her laptop, and look at her actual bank accounts. The engagement party high was completely gone, replaced by a sudden, sickening dread. Something was terribly wrong, and she was about to find out that the free ride she had taken for granted was officially over. Simone burst through the glass doors of Phipps Plaza, her chest heaving with panic. She handed her valet ticket to the attendant, practically snatching the paper back as he stared at her. Just bring my car up, she snapped, tapping her foot on the concrete. The valet hurried away, but he did not come back with her pristine white luxury SUV. Instead, the manager walked out, looking deeply uncomfortable. Miss Simone? The manager said, clearing his throat. I am afraid we have a situation. A tow truck just removed your vehicle from the lower garage. Simone froze. Removed it? She asked, her voice trembling. Did I park in a reserved spot? Just pay the fine and get it back here? It was not a parking violation, the manager explained, handing her a printed receipt. The recovery team had a court order issued by the primary lien holder. They said the lease was terminated this morning. Simone snatched the paper, staring at the bold black letters. Terminated. Lien holder. She could not breathe. She pulled out her phone, dialing Trey again. This time he picked up. What is going on? Simone. Trey answered, his voice groggy like he had just woken up. I'm trying to sleep off the party. Trey, get down here right now, she screamed into the phone, ignoring the people walking past her. My bank cards are blocked. All of them. And some tow company just took my car out of the VIP garage. You need to call your guys and fix this. Trey went silent for a second. What do you mean, blocked? He asked, his tone shifting from lazy to sharp. Did you overdraw the accounts buying dresses again? No, I did not overdraw anything. She yelled, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. The bank says the accounts are closed by the primary account holder, and the car lease is terminated. Trey, you need to bring your car and come pick me up. I am stranded at the mall. Simone, my car is in the shop. Trey lied, hesitating just long enough for her to catch it. Look, just call an Uber on your phone. We will sort it out when you get home. It is probably just a tax audit or a bank error. I cannot call an Uber. Trey, my cards are declined, she said, her voice cracking with actual tears now. The app will not let me book a ride. Just catch a cab and pay cash. He shot back, sounding annoyed. I do not carry cash. Trey, I use platinum cards, she cried out. Well, figure it out, he snapped. I have to make some calls and check my own accounts. If your dad is playing games with the money, we have a real problem. He hung up. Simone stood alone on the curb, the phone beeping in her hand. The Atlanta heat was starting to press down on her, making her designer dress stick to her skin. The valets were pretending not to look at her, but she knew they were listening. She had spent the last 5 years building an image of untouchable wealth, of absolute power. And in less than 2 hours it was falling apart piece by piece. She swallowed her pride and walked toward the street corner, raising her hand to hail a passing yellow cab. The driver pulled over, rolling down the window. I need to go to the Buckhead Towers, she said, her voice shaking. I will have to go upstairs and get cash to pay you when we arrive. The driver looked at her expensive clothes and sighed. Get in, lady, he said. She slid into the back of the cab, the worn vinyl seats burning against her bare legs. She stared out the window, watching the luxury boutiques blur past. She did not know it yet, but the car and the credit cards were just the beginning. The real nightmare was waiting for her back at the penthouse. I watched it all unfold from my office downtown, listening to the audio feeds Leon had secured. Every desperate phone call, every panicked breath confirmed what I already knew. When you cut the strings on a puppet, they fall straight to the floor. I sat at my mahogany desk in my downtown office, staring at the high-resolution monitors. Leon, my private investigator, had pulled a miracle. He had hacked the lobby security feed of Simone's building and tapped her mobile device. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and watched my daughter's yellow cab pull up to the glass doors of the Buckhead high-rise. Simone stepped out of the cab looking frantic. She walked up to the front desk, waving her hand at the concierge. Pay the driver out of my petty cash account, she demanded, not even looking at the man. I need to get upstairs immediately. The concierge, a sharp young man in a gray suit, did not move. I'm sorry, Miss Simone, he said, his voice carrying through the lobby audio feed. Your petty cash account has been frozen and your access fob is deactivated. Simone froze her hand, hovering over the marble desk. Deactivated, she repeated, her voice rising in pitch. What are you talking about? I live in the penthouse. Call building management right now. The concierge reached under the desk and produced a thick manila envelope. Management left this for you, he said, sliding it across the marble. They instructed security not to let you pass the elevators. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items under the supervision of a guard. and then you must vacate the premises." I watched her rip the envelope open, her manicured nails tearing the paper. She pulled out a stack of legal documents. At the very top, printed in bold black ink, was a notice of immediate eviction and asset seizure. She stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the legal jargon, her breathing growing heavy and panicked. "This is illegal!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet, pristine lobby. "You cannot evict me without notice. I am the owner of that penthouse." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. My computer speakers picked up the ringing loud and clear. She was calling Vance, my lead wealth manager. Vance answered on the first ring, his voice calm and completely detached. "Vance, what is going on with my condo?" Simone yelled into the phone, her hands shaking violently. "The front desk is trying to lock me out, and they towed my car. Fix this right now, or I am suing the firm." Miss Simone Vance replied smoothly. "I cannot fix it because there is no error. The property management group is acting on direct orders from the primary lien holder." "I am the primary lien holder," she screamed back, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "No, you are not," Vance said, dropping the polite tone and hitting her with the cold, hard facts. "You have never owned that penthouse, Miss Simone. You have never owned the luxury SUV, and you have never owned the credit lines. Everything was purchased and maintained by Apex Holdings Incorporated. You were simply listed as an authorized resident and an authorized user." Simone stood completely still, the color draining from her face. "Apex Holdings," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a freight train. "That is my father's company. He is just a retired laborer. He does not own this building. Nathaniel is the sole proprietor and CEO of Apex Holdings," Vance corrected her. "He owns the penthouse, he owns the vehicles, and he owns the capital backing those platinum cards. For 5 years, he has graciously allowed you to utilize his corporate assets. Last night at exactly 11 o'clock, he permanently revoked that authorization." I watched her on the monitor, her knees buckling slightly, forcing her to lean against the marble desk for support. "But I am his daughter," she cried out, her voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "He cannot just leave me on the street with nothing. I have a wedding to pay for. I have a life." "Your father instructed me to tell you that you are officially cut off," Vance said, his voice showing zero sympathy. "The financial cord is severed. You have until noon to retrieve your personal clothing under security supervision. Any jewelry, art, or furniture purchased with company funds will remain in the unit. Have a good day, Miss Simone." The line clicked dead. Simone stared at her phone, her mouth hanging open. The concierge signaled a large, broad-shouldered security guard who stepped up beside her. "Ma'am," the guard said, pointing toward the elevator bank. "We need to go upstairs now. You only have 25 minutes left." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, the bitter taste settling perfectly on my tongue. 30 years of sweat and sacrifice, 30 years of building an empire from the dirt up, and she thought it was all hers by right. She thought she could stand in a ballroom, surround herself with fake friends, and hand me a $20 gas card while living in a fortress I built. The cameras showed her walking into the elevator, head hung low, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She had nothing. No car, no home, no money, just the clothes on her back and a fiancé who was only there for the ride. The illusion was shattered, the entitlement was broken, but I knew the game was not over. Desperation is a dangerous thing, and I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I crushed it completely. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the intercom button. "Send Leon in," I said. It was time to look at the secret ledger and see exactly what kind of trouble my daughter had dragged into my world. The heavy oak door of my downtown office clicked open and Leon stepped inside. He was a man who moved without making a sound, a former intelligence officer who now worked exclusively for me. He wore a sharp gray suit and carried a thick leather-bound folder under his right arm. The view behind me showcased the sprawling Atlanta skyline, a city I had helped build piece by piece. I turned my leather chair away from the floor to ceiling windows and looked at the man who held my daughter's secrets. "Good afternoon," Nathaniel Leon said, his voice low and even. "Have a seat, Leon," I replied, gesturing to the velvet chairs across from my mahogany desk. "What did you find?" I asked, leaning forward and folding my hands together. Leon sat down and placed the heavy folder flat on the desk. He did not open it immediately. He looked at me with a seriousness that told me this was not just about overdrawn credit cards or unpaid luxury leases. "You were right about the boy," Leon began, tapping his index finger on the leather cover. "Trey is a complete fraud. He has no legitimate businesses, no investment firm, and no actual income. He has been living off your daughter's platinum cards for the better part of 2 years. I already knew he was a parasite," I said, keeping my face completely neutral. "I cut the financial cord this morning. They are currently standing on the street with nothing but the clothes on their backs." Leon nodded slowly. "That is the problem, Nathaniel," he said, finally opening the folder. "Because Simone did not just give him access to your corporate accounts. When the cash flow was not fast enough for his lifestyle, and when she wanted to fund that lavish engagement party, they went looking for liquid capital, and they did not go to a bank." I felt a cold shift in the air of the room. "Banks ask questions," I said quietly. "Banks require proof of income and collateral." "Exactly," Leon agreed, pulling out a stack of financial documents and glossy surveillance photographs. "They went to the streets, Nathaniel. Specifically, they went to a man named Marcus Vance, no relation to your wealth manager. This Marcus runs a highly organized and highly violent lending syndicate out of the west side of Atlanta. He fronts cash to desperate people trying to maintain a high society image, and he charges an extortionate interest rate." I picked up one of the photographs. It showed Trey sitting at a dimly lit table in the back of a nightclub, shaking hands with a man covered in expensive jewelry and cold, dead eyes. "How much?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "The principal loan was $250,000, Leon stated, reading from a ledger sheet. "But with the penalties and the compound interest over the last 6 months, the total debt sitting on their heads right now is exactly $500,000. $500,000, Nathaniel." I set the photograph down on the smooth wood of my desk. $500,000 in street debt. My daughter, the woman who had stood in a ballroom last night mocking my worn-out suit and handing me a $20 gas card, was $500,000 in debt to a violent criminal syndicate. The sheer blinding arrogance of it was almost hard to process. "Who signed the paper?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "They both did," Leon said, sliding a copy of a promissory note across the desk. "Trey brokered the deal, but Marcus Vance is not a fool. He knew Trey had nothing of value, so he made Simone co-sign the loan. She used her penthouse and her supposed future inheritance as the collateral to secure the cash." I stared at her signature scrawled elegantly at the bottom of the page. "She pledged assets she never even owned," I said, a bitter taste rising in my mouth. "She promised them a penthouse that belongs to Apex Holdings." "Yes, sir," Leon confirmed. "And Marcus Vance has been very patient because he believed he was dealing with the heir to a massive fortune. He let them throw the engagement party knowing it would bleed them dry because the deadline for repayment is the end of this month, which is exactly 4 days from now." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline again. 4 days. And as of this morning, Simone and Trey have zero access to capital. The platinum cards are dead. The penthouse is locked. The luxury cars are sitting in a secure impound lot. They cannot run, and they certainly cannot pay. When word gets out on the street that her accounts are frozen, Leon said, his tone turning grim, "Marcus Vance will not wait 4 days. He will send his enforcers to collect immediately. They will take it out of Trey first, but they will not hesitate to put hands on your daughter." "What are your orders, Nathaniel?" he asked. "Do you want me to arrange a quiet payoff to clear the board and keep her safe?" I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioning. A father's instinct is to protect his child, to step in front of the bullet, to pay the ransom. But Simone was not a child. She was a grown woman who had deliberately humiliated me, lied to me, and put her own life in danger to impress a room full of strangers. If I bailed her out now, she would learn absolutely nothing. She would just find another Trey and another syndicate, and the cycle would continue until she was dead or I was bankrupt. No, I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of a judge handing down a sentence. We do not pay extortion money, Leon, and we do not save her from the fire she built herself. Leon raised an eyebrow, but he did not argue. You are letting them face the syndicate, he asked, just to be clear. I want you to track their location, I instructed, tapping my finger on the heavy oak desk. I want to know exactly where they go when they realize they have no money and no shelter. The syndicate will find them soon enough. Let them feel the squeeze, Leon. Let them look down the barrel of the gun they loaded. Only when a person is stripped of their pride and their options do you see what they are truly capable of doing. Leon gathered the photographs and the ledger sheets, sliding them neatly back into the leather folder. I will have a surveillance team on them within the hour, he said, standing up from the velvet chair. Good, I replied, turning my chair back to face the sprawling city of Atlanta. Keep me updated. The pressure is about to crack the glass and I want to watch it shatter. Leon walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. I sat alone, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I had just thrown my only daughter to the wolves, but I knew the truth of this world. Sometimes to save a person from the poison in their veins, you have to let the fever burn through them completely. By nightfall, the reality of their situation had completely settled in. With no credit cards, no penthouse, and no friends willing to answer their calls, Simone and Trey ended up at a cheap rundown motel out on the Boulder Crest Highway. Leon had his surveillance team tracking them the entire time. They paid for a single night using the last few crumpled $20 bills Trey had in his pocket. I sat in my quiet, secure study at the estate, listening to the live audio feed broadcasting directly into my encrypted laptop. The audio was crystal clear. The thin walls of the motel room offered no privacy. This is your fault, Simone. Trey yelled, his voice cracking with pure, unfiltered panic. You told me the money was endless. You told me your father was just a clueless old man who signed whatever you put in front of him. I did not know he had a holding company. Trey Simone screamed back, her voice raw and exhausted. He lied to me. He played me for a fool. Well, your fool of a father just got us a death sentence. Trey snapped, pacing the stained carpet. Marcus Vance is not going to wait. When he finds out your accounts are frozen, he's going to send his shooters. We have 3 days to come up with $500,000. 3 days, Simone. The room went quiet for a long time. I could hear the hum of the cheap air conditioner rattling in the background. Then Simone spoke, her voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. He is 68 years old, Trey, she said. So what? Trey asked, sounding confused and irritated. So he has a bad heart, Simone explained, her words slow and calculating. He takes medication for a minor arrhythmia. He has taken it for years. If he has a sudden massive heart attack, no one is going to ask any questions. They will just say his age caught up to him. I leaned closer to the laptop, my own heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. My daughter was not just plotting a theft. She was plotting my murder. Are you crazy? Trey whispered, the panic in his voice shifting into something darker. You want to take him out. If he dies, I am his only living blood relative, Simone said. Her logic completely twisted by greed and desperation. The holding company, the estate, the liquid assets, it all defaults to me as the primary heir. I know the estate laws, Trey, but it has to happen fast, and it has to look completely natural. How Trey asked, the hesitation in his voice quickly fading, replaced by the instinct to survive. He drinks a glass of iced sweet tea every single afternoon, Simone said. He sits on his back porch around 3 o'clock and reads the paper. If we slip something into the pitcher, something that spikes his heart rate and mimics a cardiac event, it will be over in 10 minutes. Trey let out a heavy breath. I know a guy on the south side who sells unregulated liquid stimulants. Bodybuilders use it, but a heavy dose will stop a weak heart cold. It leaves your system fast and does not show up on a standard autopsy, unless they are specifically looking for it. Get it tonight, Simone ordered, her voice completely stripped of any human warmth. I still have my old spare key to the back gate of his estate. I will go over there tomorrow, play the crying apologetic daughter, and make him a fresh pitcher of tea. I will tell him I want to make amends. The audio feed clicked as Leon paused the recording on his end. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the silence of the study wash over me. A normal father might have broken down in tears. A normal father might have called the police and had them arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. But I was not a normal father, and the police would only give them a few years in a county jail before letting them out on a technicality. That was not enough. They wanted to play a deadly game in my house. They thought I was an old weak man sitting on a porch waiting for the sun to set. They did not realize that the porch was wired with military-grade optics, and the tea they planned to poison was bait for a trap they could not even comprehend. I picked up my phone and called Leon. "Did you hear it?" Nathaniel Leon asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I heard every word," I replied smoothly. "Let Trey buy the stimulant tonight. Do not interfere. Tomorrow, when Simone comes to the estate, make sure the perimeter cameras are recording in maximum resolution. I want every single frame of her pouring that poison into my glass." "Understood," Leon said. "What will you do when she serves it to you?" I smiled, a cold, hard expression that did not reach my eyes. "I'm going to look my daughter in the eyes, tell her how much I love her, and let her think she has won." The next afternoon arrived with a heavy, suffocating heat. It was exactly 2:45 when the intercom at the main gate of my estate buzzed. I sat on the back porch in my favorite wicker chair, looking out over the manicured lawn. I pressed the button on my secure tablet, bringing up the front gate camera. Simone was standing there, looking like a woman who had lost everything. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and she wore a plain, inexpensive sundress. She was playing the part of the humbled, broken daughter perfectly. "Dad, it is Simone," she said, her voice crackling through the intercom speaker. "Please let me in. I know I was wrong, and I just want to apologize." I stared at her face on the screen. If I did not know about the $500,000 debt, if I had not heard her plotting my murder in that cheap motel room, I might have felt a twist of pity in my chest. But I knew the truth. She was not here to apologize. She was here to deliver the final blow. I pressed the release button, and the heavy iron gate swung open. 10 minutes later, she walked out onto the back porch. She had tears in her eyes, real tears probably born from the absolute terror of the syndicate closing in on her. She sat down in the chair across from me, burying her face in her hands. "Dad, I am so sorry," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I was so arrogant and so cruel to you at the party. I lost my way, and losing the condo and the cars, it woke me up. I do not care about the money anymore. I just want my father back." I kept my face completely still. "That takes a lot of courage to admit, Simone," I said, keeping my voice gentle and slow. "We all make mistakes. What matters is how we fix them." She looked up, wiping her eyes, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing across her face. "Let me make it up to you," she pleaded. "Let me take care of you today. It is so hot out here. Let me go inside and make you a fresh pitcher of your favorite sweet tea, just like we used to do when I was a little girl." I nodded slowly, resting my hands on my lap. "I would like that very much," I replied. Simone stood up quickly, giving me a weak, grateful smile, and walked back into the house. The moment the glass door slid shut behind her, my demeanor changed. I picked up my encrypted tablet resting on the side table and opened the live feed from the kitchen cameras. Leon had installed 4 microscopic military-grade lenses, hiding them perfectly in the crown molding and the light fixtures. On the screen, I watched my daughter walk up to the marble island. She did not waste a single second. She opened the refrigerator, pulling out the glass pitcher of tea, and set it on the counter. She poured a tall glass, dropping in a few cubes of ice. Then she reached into the pocket of her sundress and pulled out a small, unmarked plastic vial. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Watching a child you raised pour poison into your cup is a pain I cannot easily describe. It goes against the very laws of nature. She unscrewed the cap and poured the clear, liquid stimulant directly into my glass. She stirred it with a long silver spoon, slipped the empty vial back into her pocket, and took a deep, steadying breath. I set the tablet down, face down on the table, just as she pushed the glass door open. "Here you go, Dad," she said, handing me the cold, sweating glass. "Nice and cold, just how you like it." "Thank you, Simone," I said, wrapping my fingers around the glass. I brought it up to my lips, letting the rim touch my mouth. She stood there watching me intently, her eyes locked on my throat, waiting for me to swallow. Suddenly, I let out a harsh, ragged cough. I jerked my hand forward, and the glass slipped from my grip, shattering on the wooden deck. The spiked sweet tea splashed across the floorboards, pooling around my shoes. I slumped back into the wicker chair, clutching the left side of my chest, taking short, rapid breaths. "Oh my goodness," Simone gasped, taking a step back. "Dad, are you okay?" My heart, I wheezed, closing my eyes and letting my head loll to the side. "It is racing. The heat, the stress from last night, it is too much. I need my medication. It is on the kitchen counter." I peered through my half-closed eyelids, watching her reaction. For a split second, she did not move. She just stared at me, calculating if this natural episode would finish the job the poison was supposed to do. She was waiting to see if I would just die right there in the chair. "Simone, please." I gasped out, making my voice sound weak and terrified. She blinked, snapping out of her dark trance, and ran back into the house. She returned a minute later with my pill bottle and a fresh glass of water. I took the pill, swallowing it down, and slowly let my breathing return to normal. I slumped back, looking like a fragile, broken old man, exactly what she needed to see. "I think I need to go lie down," I whispered, rubbing my chest. "You should go home, Simone. We will talk more tomorrow." She nodded, her face tight with frustration. The poison plan had failed, interrupted by my fake cardiac spell, but she saw how weak I appeared. She thought I was already standing on the edge of the grave. "Okay, Dad," she said softly. "You just rest. I will check on you later." She walked away, leaving me sitting on the wet porch. I listened to the front gate click shut, and then I stood up, my posture straightening instantly. I was not weak, and my heart was beating with perfect cold precision. I pulled out my phone, dialing Leon. "Did you get the footage I asked?" "Every single frame," Nathaniel Leon replied. "It is locked in the secure server. The local police would arrest her right now with this evidence." "We are not going to the local police," I said, looking down at the shattered glass on the floorboards. "She missed her shot with the poison, but the syndicate deadline is closing in. She will tell Trey I'm weak, but not weak enough. They will move to Plan B, and I want to be ready when they do." The night fell over the estate, thick and humid. The crickets were loud, but my study was completely silent. I sat in the dark, watching the soft glow of the security monitors. Leon called me precisely at midnight. "Trey is on the move, Nathaniel," Leon said, his voice coming through the encrypted speaker. "He left the motel 10 minutes ago, dressed in dark clothing and carrying a heavy duffel bag. I leaned forward in my leather chair. "Where's he heading, Leon?" I asked. "He's driving a stolen sedan heading straight for the northern suburbs," Leon confirmed. "He's coming to your estate." "The poison failed and the syndicate deadline is exactly 2 days away. He's getting desperate." "Let him onto the grounds," I ordered, taking a slow sip of black coffee. "Turn off the perimeter motion alarms, but keep the infrared cameras rolling in the main garage." "Are you sure?" Nathaniel Leon asked. "He might try to enter the main house." "He's a coward," I replied smoothly. "Cowards do not look a man in the eye when they strike. He will go for the garage. He knows I take the vintage Cadillac out every single morning to pick up the early paper." "Understood," Leon said, and the line went quiet. I watched the monitors waiting in the darkness. 20 minutes later, a shadowy figure slipped over the stone wall near the back guest house. It was Trey. He moved clumsily, looking over his shoulder, terrified of the shadows. He crept across the manicured lawn, bypassing the main house completely, and headed straight for the detached garage. I pressed a button on my console, switching the feed to the interior garage cameras. The heavy wooden doors were locked, but Trey used a small pry bar to force the side window open. He tumbled inside, landing hard on the concrete floor. He pulled a small flashlight from his bag, the narrow beam cutting through the pitch-black room. He walked past the modern SUVs, walking right up to my pride and joy. It was a pristine, jet-black 1968 Cadillac DeVille. I had restored that car with my own 2 hands 30 years ago, when the Empire was just a dream. Trey slid underneath the heavy steel frame, his flashlight illuminating the undercarriage. I zoomed the camera in, catching the exact moment he pulled a pair of heavy wire snips from his duffel bag. He reached up and clamped the snips around the primary brake line. With a sharp twist, he severed the thick rubber hose. The dark, oily brake fluid immediately began to drip, pooling silently on the concrete floor. He did not cut it completely off, just enough to ensure the fluid would drain slowly, failing exactly when the car hit highway speeds. It was a coward's move, a calculated sabotage meant to send me wrapping around an oak tree at 60 miles an hour. Trey slid out from under the car, wiped his hands on his dark jeans, and slipped back out the window. He was gone in less than 5 minutes. I sat in my study, watching the small puddle of brake fluid expand on the monitor. He thought he had signed my death warrant. He thought the syndicate would be paid with the life insurance money and the estate inheritance. I picked up my phone and called Leon back. "Call Marcus, the mechanic," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Tell him to bring the flatbed tow truck to the back service road. I want the Cadillac loaded up quietly and taken to a secure shop. I want full forensic documentation of the severed lines." "It will be done," Nathaniel Leon promised. The sun came up a few hours later, painting the Atlanta sky in bright orange and pale pink. The garage was empty, the Cadillac safely tucked away across town, the puddle of fluid cleaned up by my staff. Now it was time to play my hand. I needed Simone to believe the trap had sprung, but in a way that made her feel completely in control. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she answered. "Hello, Simone," said her voice, sounding groggy, but I could hear the sharp edge of anticipation underneath it. "Simone." I gasped into the receiver, letting my voice shake, making my breathing sound shallow and panicked. "Simone, please, you have to help me." "Dad," she asked suddenly, sounding very awake. "Dad, what is wrong? What happened?" "I had an accident." I cried out, holding the phone slightly away from my mouth to mimic chaos. I was driving the old Cadillac down the steep hill on Peachtree to get my medication. "The brakes, Simone, the brakes just gave out." The pedal went straight to the floor. I paused, listening to her silence on the other end. She was holding her breath, waiting for the good news, waiting for me to say I was bleeding out on the side of the road. "Are you hurt?" she asked, forcing a tone of daughterly concern. I swerved into an empty ditch. I sobbed, playing the broken old man to absolute perfection. The car is ruined, Simone. The tow truck just took it away. I hit my head on the steering wheel. I am so confused, my hands will not stop shaking. Where are you, Dad? She asked quickly. Are you at the hospital? I'm back at the estate. I whimpered. The police brought me home. Simone, I do not understand what is happening to me. My heart gave out yesterday, and today I almost drove into a brick wall. My reflexes are completely gone. I think I'm losing my mind. I could practically hear her smiling on the other end of the line. The poison failed. The car crash failed to kill me, but the psychological warfare was working perfectly in her favor. She thought I was breaking down, becoming a terrified, helpless burden who could no longer manage a massive financial empire. Dad, listen to me, Simone said, her voice taking on a soothing, authoritative tone. You are getting older. You have been pushing yourself too hard, living alone in that big house. You need someone to step in and handle things for you. I do not know what to do, I whispered, letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. I cannot even manage my own checkbook today, let alone the holding company. Do not worry about any of that right now, she cooed, the trap completely set in her own mind. I'm coming over to the estate. We are going to sit down and we are going to get your affairs in order. You just rest, Dad. I will take care of everything. Thank you, Simone, I said, making my voice sound incredibly weak. I do not know what I would do without you. I ended the call and dropped the phone onto my mahogany desk. The terrified, shaking old man vanished instantly. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my crisp white shirt, and walked over to the floor to ceiling windows. She was coming to the estate thinking she was about to take the crown from a dying king. She was bringing the paperwork, the greedy boyfriend, and the absolute arrogance of a child who thinks she has outsmarted her father. Let her come, I thought, watching the morning traffic far below in the city. The dominoes were falling exactly as I arranged them, and she was walking straight into a cage she had built with her own 2 hands. Simone did not rush over to the estate immediately. She told me she was coming, but Leon intercepted a frantic phone call between her and Trey just an hour later. The audio played through my encrypted desktop speakers, filling my quiet study. Trey was completely unhinged. He survived the crash, Trey yelled, his voice echoing in the cheap motel room. We do not have time for paperwork, Simone. Marcus Vance gave us 48 hours. That was yesterday. Tomorrow is the absolute deadline. I'm getting a private doctor. Simone argued, her voice tight and desperate. We will declare him senile and take the estate legally through a conservatorship. Legal takes weeks. Trey snapped back, his breathing heavy and panicked. The syndicate wants cash tomorrow morning. If your father does not die tonight, Marcus Vance is going to kill us both. I am handling this my way. The line went dead. I sat at my mahogany desk, pouring a fresh cup of black coffee. Trey was making his final desperate move. A cornered rat will always bite, and Trey was completely out of options. I did not call the police. I did not evacuate the estate. I simply waited in the dark, watching the monitors. At 2:15 in the morning, the perimeter sensors tripped. I watched the infrared cameras glowing in bright green and stark white on my large screens. Trey was back. He did not go for the garage this time. He crept along the dense tree line, moving toward the blind side of the main house where the heavy utility meters were bolted to the brick wall. He carried a heavy steel wrench and a small crowbar. He looked over his shoulder, constantly sweating profusely in the humid night air. I zoomed the camera in, locking onto his face. He was terrified, driven completely by the fear of the syndicate enforcers coming for his life. He reached the main gas line, the thick iron pipe that fed the entire estate. With shaking hands, he fitted the wrench over the pressure regulator. He threw his weight against the steel handle, cracking the safety seal and forcing the valve wide open. I watched the digital pressure gauge spike on my secondary monitor. A massive surge of raw natural goo was flooding directly into the basement of my home, but Trey was not finished. He needed a spark to ignite the trap. He crawled toward the small basement window right above the old utility room. He used the crowbar to pry the wooden frame open, shattering the glass latch. He pulled a long-nosed lighter from his pocket, flicked it on, and tossed the burning flame straight down into the dark basement. He turned and ran as fast as his legs could carry him, disappearing back into the thick tree line, expecting the entire house to turn into a massive fireball. He thought he had just cremated me right in my own bed. I stood up from my leather chair perfectly calm. I did not run and I did not panic. 30 years of dealing with ruthless competitors and dangerous men teaches you how to control your heart rate under pressure. I walked out of the study and headed down the main staircase toward the basement door. The smell hit me halfway down the wooden steps, a thick, sickening stench of sulfur and rotten eggs filling the enclosed air. It was a lethal concentration. One flip of a light switch, one static shock from the carpet, and the estate would be nothing but a burning crater in the ground. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small tactical flashlight. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I walked into the utility room, keeping my breathing shallow and measured. The lighter Trey had thrown through the window was lying on the concrete floor. It had landed exactly where he wanted it to, right next to the massive vintage furnace. But the lighter was completely dead. 3 hours earlier, right after I heard his intercepted phone call, I had walked down to this exact room. I had drained the pilot light, shut off the internal intake, and sprayed the entire concrete floor with a heavy industrial fire retardant foam. The lighter had bounced off the wet foam and sputtered out instantly. Preparation is the only difference between a victim and a victor. I walked past the furnace, stepping over the dead lighter, and reached the internal emergency shut-off valve. I gripped the heavy red wheel and turned it clockwise, locking it tightly into place. The loud hissing sound of the rushing gas stopped immediately. I opened the heavy basement doors, letting the cool night air sweep through the room, clearing out the toxic fumes. Once the air was breathable again, I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my jacket pocket. I picked up the dead lighter and dropped it into a clear plastic evidence bag. I walked outside to the side of the house where the broken gas meter sat in the shadows. I pulled out a specialized forensic swabbing kit provided by Leon. I carefully swabbed the steel valve and the broken safety seal, collecting the fresh DNA and the oily fingerprints Trey had left behind in his frantic panic. I sealed the swabs in a plastic tube, placing them right next to the bagged lighter. The physical trap was complete. Trey had attempted murder, arson, and domestic terrorism, all in the span of 5 minutes, and I had every single second of it recorded in maximum resolution, backed by undeniable forensic proof. I walked back inside, locking the heavy doors behind me. I picked up my phone and called Leon. "The gas leak is neutralized," I said, my voice steady and cold. "The house is completely intact and I have his DNA in my hand." "He is a dead man walking, Nathaniel." Leon replied, the absolute satisfaction evident in his deep tone. "No." I corrected him gently. "He is a pawn. Tomorrow morning, Simone is coming to play the queen. She thinks I'm a broken, senile old man. She's bringing the paperwork and the crooked doctor to steal the crown legally. Let her bring it. When the sun comes up, we move to the final phase of this game." I hung up the phone and walked upstairs to my bedroom. The air was clear, the house was perfectly quiet, and the end game was finally here. I lay down on my bed, and for the first time in 5 long years, I slept like a baby. The morning sun climbed over the Atlanta skyline, burning away the last of the night. I woke up at 6 o'clock, feeling sharp and completely focused. Today was the day my daughter would try to seal my fate with a pen. I did not put on a crisp suit or a pressed shirt. I found an old, oversized cardigan, the kind that makes a man look shrunken and frail. I slipped on a pair of loose slippers and shuffled down the grand staircase, making sure my steps were slow and heavy. I sat in the large leather armchair in my study, pulling a thick woven blanket over my knees. I looked like a man who had given up on life. At exactly 9 o'clock, the front gate buzzer chimed. I clicked the release button on my tablet and watched the cameras. Simone walked up the long driveway, and she was not alone. She brought a man with her. He wore a cheap, off-the-rack suit and carried a worn leather medical bag. Leon had already run the license plate on their sedan. The man was Dr. Evans, a disgraced physician who lost his medical license 2 years ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions. Simone had scraped the bottom of the barrel to find a professional liar willing to declare me incompetent for a fee. I unlocked the front door remotely and let them walk inside. They found me in the study, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace, my hands trembling in my lap. "Dad." Simone called out, rushing over to my chair. She dropped to her knees, placing her hands over mine. Her eyes were wide and filled with fake, desperate concern. "Dad, you look terrible," she cried. "I came as soon as I could. I brought a specialist with me to check on your heart and your memory." I slowly turned my head, blinking several times like my eyes could not focus. "Simone," I whispered, making my voice sound thin and raspy. "I am so tired, Simone. The car crashed, and then last night I smelled gas in the basement. I think I forgot to turn the stove off. I'm losing my mind." Simone exchanged a quick, triumphant look with Dr. Evans. "It is okay, Dad," she said, stroking my hand. "You've been living alone for too long. Your mind is just slipping because of your advanced age. Dr. Evans is here to help us." The crooked doctor stepped forward, opening his leather bag. "Good morning, Nathaniel," the doctor said, using a loud, condescending tone like he was speaking to a toddler. "I'm just going to ask you a few simple questions and check your vitals." I nodded weakly, letting my chin rest on my chest. He wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, inflating it quickly. He did not even look at the gauge. He shined a small pin light into my eyes, and I forced myself to flinch, looking away in confusion. "Nathaniel, do you know what day it is?" Dr. Evans asked, pulling a notepad from his pocket. I furrowed my brow, acting deeply frustrated. "It is Tuesday," I mumbled, stuttering slightly. "No, it is Thursday. I do not know, the days just bleed together." The doctor wrote something down, shaking his head. "And do you remember your financial account numbers or the name of your wealth manager?" he pressed. I closed my eyes, letting out a pitiful sigh. "I cannot remember," I whispered. "My brain feels full of fog. Please, just make it stop." Dr. Evans turned to Simone, giving her a solemn, rehearsed nod. "Miss Simone," the doctor said, his voice dripping with fake medical authority, "your father is exhibiting severe advanced signs of cognitive decline and dementia. He is no longer capable of managing his own daily affairs or his estate. It is completely unsafe for him to be making financial or legal decisions." Simone covered her mouth, letting out a dramatic, sobbing gasp. "Oh, Dad," she cried, burying her face in my blanket. "I'm so sorry. I should have been here for you, but I am here now, and I'm going to take over everything so you can just rest." She reached into her oversized designer purse, the one she bought before I froze her accounts, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She laid them out on the mahogany desk, smoothing the crisp white pages flat. "Dad, these are just some simple forms," Simone said, pointing to the bottom line of the first page. "It is a general power of attorney. It just gives me the legal right to pay your medical bills, manage the house staff, and handle your corporate accounts while you recover. You do not have to worry about the numbers anymore." I looked at the documents, my hands shaking violently as I reached out to touch the paper. "Are you sure, Simone?" I asked, my voice cracking with pure helpless fear. "I do not want to lose my house." "You will never lose your house, Dad," she promised, handing me a heavy gold pin. "I am your daughter. I am going to protect everything you built. Just sign right here on the dotted line and the stress will be gone." I gripped the gold pin, letting my hand wobble, making my signature look messy and frail. I signed the first page, the second page, and the final authorization page. I was legally signing away the entire holding company, the estate, and every liquid asset I owned. But a piece of paper is only a weapon if it stands up in a court of law. And these papers were about to be buried under a mountain of federal evidence. "There you go, Dad," Simone said, snatching the documents off the desk the moment my pen lifted. "You did the right thing." I leaned back in the large leather chair, closing my eyes, playing the exhausted, defeated victim. "Thank you, Simone," I mumbled. "I think I need to sleep now." "You sleep, Dad," she said, her voice instantly dropping the sweet, caring tone. She turned her back to me, walking quickly toward the study doors, motioning for Dr. Evans to follow her. They walked out into the grand hallway, leaving the heavy wooden doors cracked open. They thought I was asleep, but I was wide awake, staring at the hidden camera lens mounted inside the antique clock on the mantel. I picked up my tablet and tapped into the hallway audio feed. Trey had slipped through the back door and was waiting for them in the marble foyer. He paced back and forth, biting his nails, terrified that Marcus Vance and the syndicate were already driving up the hill. "Did you get it?" Trey hissed as Simone and the doctor walked into the hallway. Simone held up the signed documents, a massive, greedy smile spreading across her face. "I got it," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute victory. "He signed everything. He's completely out of his mind. He did not even read the asset transfer clauses." Trey let out a massive sigh of relief, leaning against the marble wall. "We are saved," he breathed. "We file these at the courthouse tomorrow morning. The holding company transfers to you, and we pull the $500,000 in cash to pay off Marcus Vance by noon, and the rest is ours." Simone laughed, a cold, ruthless sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. "He will be locked in a nursing home by Friday, and we are taking the first flight to Paris." "Good work, Doctor," she added. "Your money will be wired to your offshore account the second the assets clear." "A pleasure doing business with you, Miss Simone," the disgraced doctor replied. I sat in my study listening to them celebrate my financial and physical demise. They were holding the signed papers, dreaming of private jets and endless luxury. They had completely forgotten the cardinal rule of power. If someone hands you the keys to the kingdom without a fight, you are not stepping onto a throne, you are stepping onto a trap door. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Leon. "The bait is taken. Prepare the legal team and contact the federal marshals. We are going to court." The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse swung open the very next morning. Simone did not waste a single second. With the syndicate deadline breathing down her neck, she had her high-priced lawyer, a slick man named Sterling, file for an emergency conservatorship hearing. I walked into the courtroom leaning heavily on a wooden cane, wearing that same oversized cardigan from the day before. I let my shoulders slump and kept my eyes fixed on the polished floor, playing the broken old man right up to the very edge of the cliff. The courtroom was quiet, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Judge Eleanor Vance, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, sat high up behind the mahogany podium. She peered down through her reading glasses, looking over the rush-filed paperwork. Simone sat at the petitioner's table wearing a conservative pale blue suit. She looked like the perfect grieving, concerned daughter. Trey sat in the front row of the gallery, his leg bouncing nervously, checking his expensive watch every 2 minutes. He knew Marcus and the syndicate enforcers were probably waiting outside the building. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, her voice echoing in the large room. "You are asking this court to strip Nathaniel of all his legal and financial rights on an emergency basis. That is a massive request for a Thursday morning. You better have the evidence to back it up. We absolutely do, Your Honor, Sterling replied, standing up and buttoning his expensive jacket. My client, Miss Simone, is simply trying to save her father from himself. Nathaniel has suffered a rapid and severe cognitive collapse. He is a danger to his own physical safety, and he is hemorrhaging the assets of his holding company due to his advanced dementia. We have the medical documentation and the witness testimony to prove he is completely incapacitated. I sat at the defense table completely alone. I had told Leon to keep my legal team waiting in the private corridor right outside the courtroom doors. I wanted Simone and her lawyer to build their house of lies as high as they possibly could before I kicked the foundation out from under them. Call your first witness, Judge Vance ordered, leaning back in her leather chair. Sterling called Dr. Evans to the stand. The disgraced physician walked up, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the whole truth. He sat down, adjusting his cheap tie. Dr. Evan Sterling began pacing in front of the witness box. You examined Nathaniel yesterday at his private estate. What was your professional medical conclusion? Dr. Evans looked at the judge, putting on his best face of serious concern. Your Honor, I found Nathaniel to be in a state of advanced, irreversible dementia. He did not know what day it was. He could not recall his own financial accounts. He was disoriented, physically frail, and exhibiting signs of extreme paranoia. In my medical opinion, if he is left in control of his estate, he will destroy his legacy and likely harm himself. I kept my head down, listening to the man commit absolute, undeniable perjury on a federal and state level. Every word he spoke was adding another 5 years to his upcoming prison sentence. Thank you, Dr. Sterling said, looking very satisfied. The plaintiff calls our second witness, Miss Clara Hughes. A woman in her mid-40s wearing a modest dress walked up to the stand and took the oath. I had never seen this woman a single day in my life. Leon had already run her background late last night. She was a struggling local actress paid $5,000 by Trey to play the role of my terrified, abused housekeeper. Miss Hughes Sterling asked softly, You worked as Nathaniel's private housekeeper for the last 6 months, correct? Yes, sir, Clara lied smoothly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I had to quit last week because I was terrified for my life. Terrified of what Sterling prompted. Of him, she cried, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. He would wander the halls at night, screaming at people who were not there. He left the gas stove on twice, nearly burning the house down. When I tried to help him, he threw a glass at my head and threatened to hurt me. He's completely out of his mind, and he needs to be locked away in a facility for his own good. Simone reached up, wiping a fake tear from her cheek, playing the tragic victim to absolute perfection. The judge frowned, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and serious concern. The picture they were painting was devastating. A crazy, violent, senile old man sitting on a mountain of money, threatening the public and abusing his staff. Your Honor, Sterling said, wrapping up his dramatic presentation. We have the signed power of attorney executed willingly by Nathaniel yesterday, recognizing his own need for help. We simply ask the court to ratify this document, grant full conservatorship to his loving daughter Simone, and allow her to immediately access the corporate funds to secure his medical care. Trey stopped bouncing his leg, gripping the wooden bench in front of him. This was it. The moment they got the judge's signature, the money would transfer, the syndicate would be paid, and my life would be officially over. Judge Vance looked over the paperwork one last time, picking up her heavy wooden gavel. Nathaniel, she said gently, you do not have legal counsel present. Do you have anything you want to say before I make my ruling? I slowly lifted my head, dropping the hunched, broken posture. I placed both of my hands flat on the defense table and pushed myself up. I did not lean on the wooden cane. I stood tall, my spine straight, the oversized cardigan falling away from my broad shoulders. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes, and I saw the exact moment her confident smile died on her face. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice booming through the quiet courtroom, completely clear deep and absolutely terrifying to the liars in the room. "I have a great deal to say, and I have the evidence to prove every single word of it." The judge lowered her gavel, looking at me with wide eyes, completely taken aback by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "Mr. Nathaniel?" she said, her voice laced with confusion. "I thought you were incapable of standing on your own." "I do not need a cane to stand, Your Honor," I replied, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. "And I certainly do not need my daughter to manage my affairs. What you have heard today, from the moment I walked into this room, is nothing but a carefully orchestrated, desperate string of lies." Sterling jumped to his feet, his face flushing red with anger. "Objection, Your Honor," he shouted, waving his hand at me. "The man is clearly having a delusional episode. He is not in his right mind." Before the judge could even respond, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a massive, echoing thud. Every head in the gallery turned around. Leon walked in first, wearing his sharp gray suit, looking like a man who had come to collect a very serious debt. Behind him walked a team of 4 men in immaculate, tailored suits, carrying thick leather briefcases. They were the senior partners of the most ruthless, high-powered corporate law firm in the city of Atlanta. My lead attorney, a tall, imposing man named Harrison, walked straight down the center aisle, bypassing Trey and stopping right in front of the judge. "Your Honor," Harrison said, his voice smooth and dripping with absolute authority. "My name is Harrison Vance, representing Nathaniel and Apex Holdings Incorporated. We apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we were waiting for the plaintiff to officially enter her fraudulent documents into the public court record." Sterling looked at Harrison, the color completely draining from his face. "Fraudulent documents," Sterling stammered, looking down at the power of attorney on his desk. "What are you talking about? My client has a legally binding signature." Harrison opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of crisp, watermarked folders and handed them up to the judge. "Your Honor," Harrison explained, pointing to the paperwork. "The document Nathaniel signed yesterday is completely void. It was printed on our proprietary corporate watermarked paper, specifically designed to track internal fraud. Furthermore, even if the document were real, it would be entirely useless." Simone stood up, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles turning completely white. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "He signed the estate over to me. I have the right to manage his money. You cannot manage what he does not own, Miss Simone," Harrison fired back, turning to look at my terrified daughter. "Your Honor, as the documents before you clearly state, Nathaniel transferred every single liquid asset, property deed, and corporate holding into an ironclad, blind, irrevocable trust over 5 years ago. He is merely a beneficiary. He does not have the legal authority to sign away a single dime, even if he wanted to." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic buzz of whispers. The judge slammed her gavel down, demanding order. "Let me get this straight, Mr. Harrison," the judge said, reading the trust documents closely. "The daughter is trying to seize control of an estate that technically does not exist in the defendant's name." "That is exactly right, Your Honor." Harrison confirmed, a grim smile crossing his face. "But the deception goes much deeper than a simple misunderstanding of asset allocation. Miss Simone did not file this conservatorship to protect her father. She filed it because she is trying to save her own life." "Objection!" Sterling yelled, looking around the room like a trapped animal. "This is wild speculation and character assassination." "It is documented financial fact." Harrison corrected him, handing another thick file up to the podium. "Your Honor, we have provided the court with verified financial ledgers and photographic surveillance. The plaintiff, Simone, and her fiancé, Trey, are currently $500,000 in debt to a violent organized street syndicate." Trey jumped up from the gallery bench, his eyes darting toward the courtroom doors, realizing the trap was completely shut. He took a step toward the aisle, but Leon smoothly shifted his weight, blocking the exit with his broad shoulders, looking at Trey with a cold, terrifying stare. Trey slowly sat back down, his breathing rapid and shallow. The deadline to repay that syndicate is noon today. Harrison continued, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. They brought this fraudulent case to your court, Your Honor, because they needed a legal avenue to steal $500,000 before the street enforcers come to collect their lives. They paid Dr. Evans to lie about a dementia diagnosis. They paid the actress Miss Hughes $5,000 to lie about domestic abuse. The fake housekeeper, Miss Hughes, buried her face in her hands, realizing she had just committed federal perjury for a payday she would never get to spend. Dr. Evans stared blankly at the wall, his medical bag sitting uselessly at his feet, his fraudulent career officially over. Sterling physically took a step away from Simone, looking at his client with absolute disgust. He was a slick lawyer, but he was not a criminal, and he knew his legal license was suddenly on the line. I had no knowledge of this, Your Honor, Sterling pleaded, throwing his hands up in the air. I was presented with what I believed were legitimate medical concerns. Simone was hyperventilating now, clutching the edge of the wooden table, looking back and forth between the judge and my unyielding stare. Dad, please, she whimpered. The arrogant facade completely shattered, leaving nothing but a terrified, broken shell. Tell them you were just confused. Tell them we can fix this. I stood there feeling the weight of 30 years of hard work resting firmly on my shoulders. I did not raise my voice, but when I spoke, the entire room held its breath. We are far past fixing anything, Simone, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. You brought me into this courtroom to steal my life and throw me in a cage. Now it is time for you to see what a real cage looks like. I turned my attention from my daughter and looked directly up at Judge Vance. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. The financial fraud and the perjury you have seen today are just the beginning. My daughter and the man sitting behind her did not just plan to steal my money, they planned to end my life. The courtroom went completely still, so quiet you could hear a pin drop on the floor. Judge Vance leaned forward, gripping her wooden gavel tight. That is a very serious accusation, Nathaniel, the judge said, her voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper. I have the proof to back it up, I replied, standing tall. Harrison, I said, nodding to my lead attorney. Harrison opened his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a small encrypted tablet. He handed it to the bailiff, who quickly connected it to the large video monitor mounted on the courtroom wall. Your Honor, Harrison said, stepping back so the judge had a clear view. We would like to enter Exhibit A into the official court record. The large screen flickered to life. It showed the crystal clear high-definition footage from my back porch. The timestamp in the corner read exactly 2 days ago. The entire courtroom watched as Simone walked onto the screen carrying a pitcher of sweet tea. They watched her pour the glass, reach into her pocket, and pull out the small plastic vial. Simone let out a choked, terrified gulp, covering her mouth with both hands as she watched herself on the giant screen. She watched herself pour the clear liquid stimulant directly into my glass, stirring it with a silver spoon. The video showed my fake cardiac spell, my shattered glass on the deck, and her cold, calculating stare as she waited to see if I would die right there in my chair. The gallery erupted into absolute chaos. People gasped, murmuring in absolute horror. Judge Vance slammed her gavel over and over again, demanding order in her court. But we were not finished. Harrison tapped the tablet screen again, bringing up Exhibit B. The video switched to the dark infrared feed from my detached garage. The courtroom watched Trey sneaking through the window, sliding under my vintage Cadillac, and using heavy wire snips to sever my brake lines. The video cut to a second clip showing Trey prying open my basement window, turning the gas valve and throwing a lighter into my home. Trey jumped up from the gallery bench, his face completely pale, looking wildly around for an exit. "Sit down," Leon commanded, his voice booming like thunder from the back of the room. Trey sank back into the wooden pew, completely defeated, his entire body shaking with terror. Harrison tapped the screen one last time, playing Exhibit C. The audio recording from the hallway outside my study filled the courtroom speakers. Simone's voice rang out loud and incredibly clear. He signed everything the recorded voice bragged. He is completely out of his mind. He did not even read the asset transfer clauses. Then Trey's recorded voice answered, echoing off the high walls. "We pulled $500,000 in cash to pay off Marcus Vance by noon, and the rest is ours," Simone's voice laughed, a cold and ruthless sound. "He will be locked in a nursing home by Friday, and we are taking the first flight to Paris." The audio ended, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Judge Vance took off her reading glasses, rubbing her temples, her face a mask of pure, absolute fury. She looked down at Simone, then at Dr. Evans, and finally at Trey. "I have sat on this bench for 30 years, Judge Vance said, her voice shaking with righteous anger. "I have seen greed and I have seen betrayal. But I have never in all my years seen a conspiracy so deeply wicked and so incredibly arrogant." The judge picked up her gavel, pointing it directly at the defense lawyer. "Mr. Sterling," the judge ordered, "step away from that table. You are no longer representing this woman." Sterling grabbed his briefcase and practically ran to the side of the courtroom, putting as much distance between himself and Simone as humanly possible. Judge Vance looked toward the back doors. "Bailiffs secure the courtroom," she commanded. "No one leaves." The heavy wooden doors swung open one last time. A team of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers marched down the center aisle. They were led by a senior agent, a man I had worked with quietly to coordinate this exact moment. Simone, the lead agent, said, stepping up to the petitioner's table, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted extortion, and federal bank fraud." Simone did not fight. She did not scream. She just collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably as the federal agent pulled her arms behind her back and locked the heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. The metallic click echoed in the large room, sounding like a prison door slamming shut. Two more agents walked up to the gallery, grabbing Trey by the shoulders, hauling him to his feet. "You are under arrest," an agent said, reading him his rights for attempted murder, domestic terrorism, and conspiracy. Trey was crying now, begging for mercy, pleading that it was all Simone's idea. The agents ignored him, snapping the cuffs on his wrists and dragging him toward the exit. Dr. Evans and the fake housekeeper, Miss Hughes, were placed in handcuffs right next to them, arrested for federal perjury and criminal conspiracy. In less than 5 minutes, the entire room had been swept clean of the poison my daughter had brought into my life. I stood at the defense table watching the federal agents march my only child down the center aisle. She stopped right in front of me, her face red. Her expensive clothes wrinkled, her arrogance completely destroyed. "Dad, please," Simone begged, the tears streaming down her face. "I am your daughter. Do not let them take me away. Please, Dad, I love you." I looked into her eyes, searching for the little girl I used to know, the one I had built this entire empire for. But she was gone, replaced by a greedy, ruthless stranger who would have danced on my grave for $1. "I love you too, Simone," I said, my voice quiet but steady as a rock. "But you made your bed and now you have to lie in it. You wanted the crown, but you forgot that the king always protects his castle." I turned my back to her, looking up at the judge. The agents pulled Simone away, her desperate wailing cries echoing down the marble hallway, fading into nothing. The trap had snapped shut, the board was cleared, and the empire was perfectly safe. The gavel fell, and the courtroom cleared, but the justice I demanded did not stop at those heavy wooden doors. When you pull a single thread on a dirty sweater, the whole thing unravels. Simone and Trey had tied themselves to Marcus Vance and his violent syndicate. They thought he was their secret weapon. They did not know that Leon had spent the last 3 days mapping every single connection they made. Before the sun set on that Thursday, the federal agents took my evidence and kicked in the doors of a massive warehouse on the west side of Atlanta. Marcus Vance was sitting in a leather chair counting stacks of dirty money when the flashbangs went off. The feds hit him with a massive RICO charge. Racketeer, influenced, and corrupt organizations. The kind of charge that buries a man for life. They seized his cars, his bank accounts, and his properties. The very syndicate that terrified Trey into cutting my brake lines was completely dismantled, swept into the back of armored transport vans. The streets of Atlanta were a little bit cleaner, and I did not even have to raise my voice. The legal system moves slow, but when it has high-definition video and a signed confession, it moves like lightning. Trey tried to cut a deal. He sat in a cold interrogation room, crying like a child offering to testify against Simone. The federal prosecutor just laughed at him. They did not need his testimony. They had the cameras, the forensic swabs from the gas meter, and his recorded phone calls. The judge handed him 25 years in a maximum security penitentiary. Dr. Evans and the fake actress took plea deals. They traded their expensive suits and Hollywood dreams for 5 solid years in federal lockup. But the heaviest hammer fell on my own flesh and blood. Simone stood before Judge Vance 3 months later for her official sentencing. She wore a standard-issue bright orange federal jumpsuit. The designer makeup was gone, her hair was flat, and the arrogant fire in her eyes was completely extinguished. Her public defender pleaded for leniency, citing her lack of a prior criminal record. The judge looked down from the bench, her face carved out of stone. "You plotted to kill the man who gave you life for a lifestyle you did not earn," the judge said. "There is no leniency for that level of evil." 30 years. That was the number that echoed in the quiet courtroom. 30 years without parole in a high-security federal women's prison. Simone collapsed into her chair the same way she did on the day of her arrest. She looked back at the gallery, searching for me, searching for the father she had mocked and tried to bury. But I was not there. I did not attend the sentencing. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking a glass of iced sweet tea, watching the sun rise over my estate. I had already said my goodbyes. The transition from a Buckhead penthouse to a concrete cell is a violent shock to the system. I received a report from Leon detailing her new daily routine. Simone wakes up at 4:30 in the morning every single day. There is no silk bedding, no room service, and no platinum credit cards. She sleeps on a thin, lumpy mattress surrounded by cold steel bars and cinder block walls. The woman who once stood in a grand ballroom sipping vintage champagne now stands in a crowded, noisy cafeteria eating bland food off a plastic tray. She sits alone, avoiding the hard stares of the women around her, women who have survived real hardships, not manufactured entitlement. The woman who once spent $12,000 on a handbag now earns 12 cents an hour working in the prison laundry facility. She spends 10 hours a day standing on a hard concrete floor, surrounded by the deafening roar of industrial washing machines. The air in the laundry room is thick with heat smelling of bleach and cheap detergent. She wears heavy rubber gloves, scrubbing the stains out of uniforms worn by hundreds of other inmates. Her manicured nails are cracked and broken. Her soft hands are calloused and burned by the harsh chemicals. She pushes a heavy yellow mop bucket across the wet floors, doing the exact same menial back-breaking labor she once mocked me for doing. When she pushes that heavy yellow mop, her mind must drift back to that engagement party. She must remember the moment she handed me that $20 gas card, laughing with her wealthy friends. I wonder if she realizes that $20 would make her the richest woman on her cell block today. I wonder if she finally understands the true value of $1 now that she has to scrub a concrete floor for a fraction of a penny. She tried to write to me, of course. The first letter arrived in a standard stamped envelope bearing the logo of the federal penitentiary. The handwriting was messy, stained with what looked like tears. I did not open it. I instructed Leon to return every piece of mail to the sender unread. A man can forgive a lot of things, but he cannot allow a snake back into his garden just because it shed its skin. The cold reality of her choices is something she has to live with every single day for the next 3 decades. She wanted to play a high-stakes game using my life as the betting chip. She lost, and the house always collects its debt. The holding company is secure, the estate is quiet, and the toxic rot has been surgically removed from my legacy. I built this empire with honor, and I will be damned if I let greed tear it down. The city of Atlanta was moving fast outside my downtown office window, but inside everything was completely still. I stood looking out at the skyline. I helped build a skyline that almost went to a woman who would have sold it for scrap. It had been exactly 1 year since the gavel fell in that courtroom. The dust had settled, the syndicate was rotting in federal holding, and the penthouse had been sold to a quiet, respectful doctor. The empire was secure, but an empire without an heir is just a temporary pile of bricks. I'm getting older, and my heart, though strong enough to survive a betrayal, is not going to beat forever. I needed someone to take the reins. I turned away from the glass as the heavy mahogany door clicked open. Leon walked in, giving me a respectful nod, and stepped aside. Behind him walked my nephew, Julian. Julian is my late sister's boy. He is 28 years old, wearing a neat but inexpensive gray suit, the kind you buy off the rack for your first real job interview. He held his posture straight, his eyes scanning the massive, luxurious office with a mixture of awe and quiet respect. "Good afternoon, Uncle Nathaniel," Julian said, taking his hat off and holding it in his hands. "You asked to see me." "Have a seat, Julian," I replied, gesturing toward the plush velvet chairs across from my desk. Julian sat down carefully, placing his hat on his lap. For the last 5 years, while Simone was out swiping platinum cards and laughing at my faded clothes, Julian was the one who actually showed up. He works as a site manager for a mid-sized construction firm on the south side of the city. He drives a 10-year-old pickup truck, works 50 hours a week, and never once in all the years I have known him asked me for a single dime. When he thought I was just a retired, struggling laborer, he used to drive up to my house every Sunday afternoon. He would bring groceries, fix the leaky pipes under my sink, and sit on the porch with me drinking sweet tea. He never looked at his watch, and he never treated me like a burden. "How is work treating you, son?" I asked, sitting down in my heavy leather chair. "It is good, Uncle Nathaniel." Julian smiled a genuine warm expression. "We just broke ground on that new community center in Decatur. It is hard work, but it pays the bills and keeps a roof over my head. I'm grateful for it." I looked at him, seeing the calluses on his hands, the exact same calluses I had when I was his age. He understood the value of $1 because he actually had to trade his sweat to earn it. "Julian," I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the desk, "do you know why I brought you up to this office today?" He looked around the room, taking in the expensive artwork and the sprawling view of the city. "To be honest, Uncle Nathaniel, I do not," he admitted. "When you called and told me to come to the Apex Holdings building, I was completely confused. I thought you lived on a fixed pension." I reached into my top drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I laid it flat on the desk, pushing it slowly across the polished wood until it rested right in front of him. "I do not live on a pension, Julian," I said softly. "I own this building. I own the construction firm you work for. I own commercial real estate across the entire state of Georgia. I built an empire from the dirt up, and for the last 5 years I hid it from everyone to see who was standing beside me for love and who was standing beside me for money." Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely unable to process the words I was speaking. "You own the firm," he whispered, looking down at the leather portfolio. "But Simone, she always said you were struggling." "Simone is currently serving 30 years in a federal penitentiary," I stated, letting the cold reality of that fact settle into the room. "She tried to take my life to steal what I built because she felt entitled to the throne." She looked at my old suits and saw weakness. "But you, Julian, you looked at my old suits and saw family." I opened the leather portfolio. Inside were the legal transfer documents drafted by Harrison and his legal team. They were drawn up on the secure watermarked paper. I'm stepping down from the day-to-day operations. I continued, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who has made his final decision. I need a successor. I need a man who knows how to pour concrete before he tries to buy a penthouse. I need a man who brings groceries to an old man on a Sunday without expecting a mansion on a Monday. Julian looked down at the papers, his eyes wide, his hands shaking slightly. "Uncle Nathaniel, I cannot take this," he stammered. "I'm just a site manager. I do not know how to run a massive holding company." "You know how to work, Julian," I corrected him gently. "You know how to respect people, and you know how to build a solid foundation. I can teach you the numbers. I can teach you the corporate strategy. Leon will stay on as your head of security, and Harrison will guide you through the legal maze, but I cannot teach character, and you already have that in spades." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy, solid gold pen. The exact same pen Simone had used to sign her fraudulent papers. I placed it on top of the documents. "Sign the papers, Julian." I ordered, a proud smile finally breaking across my face. "Take the keys to the kingdom. You earned it not with greed, but with quiet, steady loyalty." Julian picked up the pen, his eyes filling with tears. He looked at me, nodding slowly, understanding the massive weight of the legacy I was handing him. He signed his name on the dotted line, securing the future of the empire and proving that the bloodline was not completely broken. I stood up, walking around the desk, and pulled my nephew into a tight embrace. The storm was finally over, and the house was built on solid rock. Blood does not entitle you to another man's empire, and greed is a fire that will eventually burn down your own house. Respect the foundation built before you, because the hands that quietly fed you can just as easily close the door and let you starve in the cold.